Call to order a work session of Goodyear City Council, March 17, 2008. And, all items listed are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. We have 2 council members missing. One is a bit under the weather and the other is out of town. We don't need to excuse them for a work session. No. Okay. First item on our work session, I think Lily and Brenda are handling this one. Lily?
Mayor Kavanaugh, council members, good evening. Our presentation tonight will have 3 parts. I will provide a brief history outlining the outstanding progress we've made thus far. Brenda Bernardi, chairperson of the Arts and Culture Commission, will present the Commission's mission statement and vision, giving you a clear image of who we are and what we would like to accomplish with your support. Diane Kripe, our public art specialist, will then update you on our current and upcoming public art projects. At the end, I'll return to answer any questions you may have. In 2006, Goodyear's Percent for Public Art ordinance was adopted. 1 year later, after an impressive response of 50 qualified candidates, 9 residents were selected and appointed to form the Goodyear Arts and Culture Commission. These unique individuals come to us from all corners of the city with experience in arts administration, business, nursing, visual arts, and performing arts. The one thing they all have in common is a passion and enthusiasm for the arts. Some of them are here tonight, and I would like to recognize them at this time. Please stand as I call your name. Julie Barker, Brenda Bernardi, Bruce Burnell, Alex Coley, Norma Cunningham, Bonnie Mostert, April Wesley, I don't believe she's here, and our alternate Leslie William Nichols, and ex-official member representing the West Valley Arts Council, Bernadette Mills. I'm not sure she could be here this evening. I just want to take a second tonight to thank and acknowledge Alex and Brenda for their additional support on tonight's presentation. Alex did the PowerPoint for us, and you'll see it's quite outstanding. The Arts Commission has been meeting monthly, and during this time we have accomplished a great deal. We have toured local public art projects, attended the Southwest Arts Conference, as well as the Arts Congress at the legislature. We've reviewed the West Valley Arts Council's blueprint and have established subcommittees to not only create our bylaws, but investigate the possibility of a performing arts center, as well as develop policy and guidelines for an exhibition space in the lobby of City Hall. We received a grant from the Arizona Commission on the Arts that partially funded a planning retreat where we were able to develop our mission statement and vision for the Goodyear Arts and Culture Commission. Brenda Bernardi will now present our exciting plans.
Thank you. Mayor Kavanaugh, members of the council, thank you for having us here tonight. I'd like you to indulge me for a minute and think back to your first childhood arts experience. A time when maybe somebody gave you a crayon and a blank piece of paper and asked you to draw. What did you draw? Many of us drew our homes, our families, the sunshine, rainbows, our hopes and our dreams. And this really simple analogy allows us to see that the Goodyear Arts and Culture Commission has a unique opportunity to bring neighbors together and to start coloring the future of our city. So our mission statement is not just what we do or how we do it, but really answers the question, why do we exist? It gives us a framework for creating our further plans. So the Goodyear Arts and Culture Commission identifies and develops a common artistic and cultural personality for the city of Goodyear that embraces, celebrates, and unites our diverse histories, beliefs, cultures, and aspirations. We strive to create public dialogue, advance education, and inspire civic pride. We do this through the development of innovative programs in public art, creating exciting and economically viable arts events, providing advocacy for the arts in private and public arenas, developing opportunities for local and emerging artists, and ensuring our children attain greater academic achievement through arts education. Our vision statement includes 4 key areas. Our first priority is to demonstrate the value of the arts that invites community investment. To support this vision, we will develop community awareness programs to encourage participation in the arts, develop a marketing campaign to inspire and educate the community, and be strong advocates for the arts in Goodyear. Next, make Goodyear the performing and visual arts destination in the West Valley. We've heard from many of our residents that they would like to see Goodyear use the arts to become the jewel of the West Valley. We will work to grow public art and develop additional partnerships by continuing to develop the public art program that you'll hear more about in a moment, educating and informing the public on public art, chairing the selection panels, and creating an ordinance for art in private development. We will also strive to actively participate in the city's process to build a performing arts center. We appreciate Council's leadership at the March 3rd work session, but we do understand that many of the requests for proposal barriers that were referred to have been addressed in a way that may put the economic viability of the project at risk. And we feel that our committee has a unique opportunity to provide input into the procurement process to address these issues. We would also like to study existing community needs assessment instruments, assemble data, and make recommendations to Council regarding the Performing Arts Center. And of course, we support the arts to be used for great academic achievement. We will be working to advocate for the Arizona Arts Education Standards in partnership with other existing organizations, and support and develop innovative school-based partnerships for the community youth. Our last goal is to grow and develop arts and culture in the city of Goodyear. 2 areas of focus will be programs and events and venues. Under programs and events, we would develop innovative arts programming to promote and develop artists. Review and participate in existing events to determine potential partnerships. And study the viability of creating new events and programs. With regards to venues, we would like to develop public and private partnerships to use as galleries and studios. A perfect example will be the glass display cases in City Hall that you'll hear about in a moment. As we move forward, we will be working together with all of our stakeholders to develop these points into a work plan that will clearly outline our goals, our strategic direction, and our timeline. So, Mayor Kavanaugh and members of the Council, at this time I would like to take this opportunity to say again what an honor and a privilege it is to see firsthand the growth of the arts and culture community here in Goodyear, and to say that I look forward to continuing my work with this dynamic and talented group of commissioners and staff members as we strive to create public dialogue, advance education, and inspire civic pride through the arts.
Good evening, Mayor Kavanaugh and members of the Council. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of some of the public art projects that we're working on and some of the projects that are going to be coming up. And the first one on your screen is Goodyear Ballpark. And as you know, Donald Lipsky was the artist who has been selected for that project. This was a nationwide call to artists, request for qualifications. We had 75 very, very talented artists apply for this project, which is a very, very huge number in the public art field. From that, we had an artist selection panel that narrowed it down to 4. We brought in 4 artists, and they selected Donald Lipsky. This is just an overview of some of his past work. This is a project that was completed last year that he did for the city of Scottsdale. It's on a major crossroads, Camelback and Scottsdale Road. And this is one other project that he did, which was a private commission for just a private residence. And it gives, and the reason why I'm showing this is because it's titled Shovels. And as you can see, he took a succession of shovels and created artwork for the front of this building. And that's one of his hallmarks, is taking found objects and making creative artist statements from that. So that's what we're looking forward to seeing for the Goodyear Ballpark. Another project we have coming up, which is in the final stages, this is the selection, yikes, that was put together by Logan Simpson Design. They actually came up with 5 different concepts. It was brought to the residents of Historic Goodyear. We had a wonderful turnout. About 19 residents came. This is the concept that they have selected. This project is now out for bid. And this will go in all the street sign toppers for the Historic Goodyear District. Okay, this project will look familiar. This is the almost completed Van Buren Bridge. The designer and artist is Lori Lundquist, who has become almost a de facto artist in residence for the city and the ADOT projects, which is great because it gives a lot of continuity to all the different freeway projects and the bridge projects. And the funding for this project came out of the actual bridge project budget, and it will be completed probably within the next month or so. Okay, and many of you are familiar with this, the Bullard Avenue Underpass. Again, the artist is Lori Lundquist. She took her inspiration from the city imaging, an imaging of, I don't know if it was competition, but it was a survey that was done some time ago. And basically this survey asked the residents what were some of the things that they thought were the icons for the city, and those were the mountains and rivers and so forth. This is another project, the McDowell Road Commercial Corridor, which again, Lori is the designer. This is being funded by bond proceeds and developer assessment. She was hired by the developer to do this project. This is not city-funded money. And she came up with a design for 2 bridges, McDowell Road and Monte Vista, as well as fencing that will be enclosing certain areas of this park. There will be children playing on the fences for the area around the children's playground tot lot, and then there will be other designs depending on the area of the park. Okay, this is a sound wall, which again is a private developer project that is coming through the city. This again, she took the motif of the mountains and came up with a very simplified design, but this is a very, very long wall, 1,300 square foot. But again, this is for Evergreen Commons. It's on the south side of I-10.
It's 1,300 feet long?
1,300 feet long. Okay, this is the Bullard Avenue traffic interchange. You've already seen the work that's going on the underpass, and what we're looking toward doing is coming up with what they call the back of barrier, which is something that's seen from the crossroads of the city at that particular corner, as well as some retaining wall designs. Okay, some other projects that we've got coming up. Historic Goodyear. This shows you some of the partnerships that we've developed with other departments within the city and outside of the city. We'll be working with economic development to come up with art enhancements for different benches when there's some redevelopment for Historic Goodyear, metal banners for that area. Fire Station 185 at Pebble Creek. We'll be putting out a request for qualifications for artists to come up with some artist-designed signage for that particular project. We're working on partnering with the water department, water wastewater, for a wall around Well 1 in Palmatier Park. Also looking at a partnership with water for the water administration building to come up with a public artwork that's going to reflect the idea of the vital role of water in the desert and the fact that there are so many school children that are going to be coming by that area. Then another exciting project is City Hall lobby. We're looking at different public spaces within the city, interior spaces that could serve as a display. And our first project is going to be with the Three Rivers Historical Society. We'll be working with them to come up with some artifacts, photographs, other objects that could be put in a display case. And then that will be on a rotating basis. Streetscape project is a project that's geared toward the local artists, emerging artists, to show not sculpture, which is three-dimensional, but two-dimensional artworks. That would be photography, drawings, paintings. We'll be constructing a display that will look something like a light rail station, and it will have rotating exhibitions of two-dimensional artwork that will be juried. All these projects will involve stakeholders. All of them that have a selection panel component to them will have a member of the Arts and Culture Commission chair that panel. So the streetscape project is very similar to what, if you've ever been to Phoenix and you've seen the 7th Avenue streetscape, it's a great opportunity to give local artists a chance to exhibit their work. Then we've already talked a little bit about the I-10 Art Enhancement projects, which we're partnering with ADOT on some phase. And then the last project is Foothills Community Park. Okay.
Any
Okay.
questions?
Any questions from the public or comments from the public? Okay, we'll start over on the right. Councilmember Holland?
Well, I don't really have any questions, thanks to you guys. And the meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago kind of filled me in, and I'm very excited about it. It's going to make everything just kind of come together. So thank you so much for all your hard work.
Councilmember Cavalier?
Yes, and again, I want to thank Brenda and all the commission and everyone, and Lily for your leadership in putting this group together. It's a great presentation tonight, and we really appreciate it. I want to just make one comment. I used some of your material when I went down to justify the need for our project from CDAC, CBDG funds, and we did get our $475,000 for the renovation of Western Avenue in our downtown Goodyear.
Great.
So
That's
that
great
passed.
news.
That passed 100%. But it was a battle, but we got there. And I did use some of your material, what we were trying to do in Historic Goodyear, to try to bring it up to what we feel where it should be. And because they were trying to make this a commercial project only, and I said, no, it's a pedestrian project. It's for the people that live in the area, and that justification was part of what I used. So thank you very much for the work you've done on this. It helped me in that.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Nothing really to add. I'm just glad to see you get off the ground and rolling, and obviously bringing a lot of passion from the citizen side of things to the Arts Commission. So it'll be exciting to see the projects progress over the next several months and years.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only question I would have relative to what's going on in the city right now are the monument signs that we have throughout the city. Getting a lot of complaints, a lot of questions from our residents as to what they actually stand for. I know the council approved those, and we thought that it was a good idea when we viewed them, but I think some identification at the top of the slivers, especially the monument, to identify what they represent. People are just not getting the impression of what the configurations are. You know, if we could identify one word, you know, like mountain or valley or something on that order, so that they can relate to what they mean. There's nothing on there that really basically identifies that instrument to Goodyear itself.
Mayor Kavanaugh, Councilmember Sousa, this was developed a couple of years ago. We were in a committee. I was on that committee, so I can speak a little bit about that through the Planning and Zoning Department. And what we did is we took the information from the image committee that came up with those symbols. Apparently, our residents view Goodyear as the sunrise. The sun rays is very important to them, as well as the rivers and the mountains and the cityscape. So those are the four images that you see out there. What I can do with your and of course management's approval is speak with our public information office and see if we can put out an article about how they came about, and talk about the symbols and talk about where they started, and to see if we are getting a lot of really positive response. A lot of people love the signs, and so sometimes those who write because they have a negative thing to say, and they talk about the positive things. And so, public art, and that really wasn't part of the public art program. However, it is out there, and it is in the public realm, and that does happen. And discussion is good. It's good to remind our residents of what they did say and what they do love about our city.
And not only that, we have to take into consideration that we're going to have a lot of people coming to the city because of baseball. And they're going to wonder what those slivers are. And I think by identifying them in some way.
We could put some literature out. We could do some education on what the symbols mean.
You know, a little sign on top of it, you know, that is just like the monument itself, you know, with the rust color that identifying it. But that's the only complaints I'm getting. Another thing, I'm reading the information that you gave me, and the only thing that upset me about one thing was the perception of Goodyear as a cow town. I have never heard that in my 9 years of sitting up here, that we were a cow town. With only fast food chain stores and no unique character. I can't buy that at all.
This was a retreat where we did brainstorming, and we took everything that was stated and wanted to honor all the statements that were said. We will bring back to you a strategic plan that will be developed from the information that's on that report. I don't believe that anyone on the Arts Commission believes that it's a cow town. What they were trying to say is that they have heard some people say that, and we want to make sure that we counter that with the arts and with other things, because it's not true. We don't believe it.
I hope other council people don't see us as a cow town. Yeah, if you're going to use that type of phraseology, I'd certainly like to see it eliminated as of right now.
All right.
I want to thank you very much for your presentation. It was enlightening, well thought out. You're on the right path.
Mayor Kavanaugh, Councilmember Sousa, I want to thank the Arts Commission. Without them, none of you wouldn't have seen a presentation. Alex Kolick, like I said, and he has come in today. Alex, are you here? Can you? He put the PowerPoint presentation together, and we did. There was a lot of brainstorming, a lot of work together, and I also want to thank Diane Kripe for all her work on the public art realm. It's been wonderful.
Okay, we have a couple more questions, I think. Vice Mayor?
To Dick's point, we're going to cross a bridge at some point in the future of council not liking a project that you all like, or the community questioning the interpretation of a project. And so I would encourage y'all to be on the lookout for literature that can help educate us and help educate the public as to, having been involved, in my career, very in-depth, or what I would consider in-depth in public art on the light rail project, we ran into the very same questions that Councilman Sousa just posed, is what do these symbols mean? And sometimes to the artist, that's what they want. That's the point. Is to get that discussion and drive that discussion, so that way you and I are then dialoguing about the mountains, or you and I are then dialoguing, because that's kind of some of the net effect of public art. So maybe working with Paula on the website and kind of address that issue of how is public art interpreted, maybe give project details about, come up with project descriptions and that sort of thing, and utilize those resources to our advantage in terms of not just educating us, the 7 of us up here, and your group, but educating city staff as well as private developers that are coming in and other citizens. Because no doubt we're going to cross it at some point. Y'all are going to love a project, and you're going to come to 7 individuals, whether it's these 7 individuals that are sitting here, and 4 of them are going to hate it. It's going to happen. It's happened in every single community that's dealt with public art. We're not going to reinvent the wheel here, but if we can do some of that education early on, so that that shock value isn't there, that way we're then having an expressed dialogue on our likes and our dislikes versus just putting things down or shooting things down when it does come in front of us.
Wonderful suggestion, Mayor Kavanaugh.
Councilmember Holland?
Well, art is in the eye of the beholder. And for a lot of us, we're not very artistic. Some of us are, but a lot of us aren't. And I think the education part is very important, like Councilman Antoniak was talking about. In Focus is a good time to put some of those blurbs in there, because I know a lot of folks read that just say, well, this is the intent. And, the constituents just kind of have to take that and try to interpret it to their best advantage. And I think that's what we will be trying to do as well. It is true we will not always agree. That's okay. That's what it's all about. We will not all agree. I kind of like the Cowtown comment, though. Can't let it pass. Maybe some of our folks that lived here a long time may remember some of the things that we had here that were more ranch-like. And perhaps that's part of how they would like to remember this city. But we've changed. We're not the same. We're moving on. So I say, hey, good luck, and can't wait to see what you guys have got to present, and don't want any of those comments to get you down. Don't let them slow you down. Thank you.
I have a question for Brenda. Brenda, you mentioned in your briefing that you'd like to be involved, your commission would like to be involved in the dialogue on the Performing Arts Center, and I certainly would love to have you involved too. Can you tell me how you would be involved in that?
We set up a subcommittee to look at the possibility. We knew that there was an RFQ and an RFP, so we started investigating in our subcommittee what were some of the alternatives, what were some of the competitors out there in terms of performing arts space, starting to compile our own information and to educate ourselves on what would a performing arts center look like for the city of Goodyear, so that we could make some educated decisions. Where we're at right now is we do feel a little bit of a disconnect. We're not quite up to speed with where city staff is in communication with the proposed developers. So we are just keeping an eye on that. We would love to be more involved in that process if there is a way for our subcommittee to maybe help bridge some of the communication gaps that are between staff and Civica.
Lily, what do you think? Or you can pass it to the city manager? Or?
Well, as you know, our Arts and Culture Commission is an advisory group, and so what they have discussed is recommendations, and they do want to be involved in some form of recommending, not deciding, and so...
Mr. Mayor, we would absolutely like the opportunity to work closely with the commission. At this point, we're still obviously premature in the proposal stage, but certainly I think there's even an opportunity right now to talk about where we've been and sit down with the commission. And then also even after that, when we get an opportunity to look at where this project may go, we would like to get that input.
Well, that's a great response. Thank you. You provide a skill which we can use, so we want to call upon it. Okay? Thanks a lot. Great work. You're a great commission, no doubt about it. And you work hard. And please keep doing that, because it's an important subject.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Okay, we've got Sean Bradford and cost of service study.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the Council. Tonight we're going to be providing you an update to our ongoing cost of service study. Here's just a quick agenda. I'll just give you a little bit of background on the study, some of the goals and its objectives. At that point, I'll turn it over to Dennis Jackson from Red Oak Consulting. He'll get into the actual findings from the first two phases of the assessment, and then I'll come on the back end and we'll talk about the summary and some conclusions and where do we go from here. So we're going to need some council input at that point. Just as by way of background, the cost of service study was co-sponsored by the Water Resources and Finance Department. We kicked that project off in January of 2007 with the primary goal that we want to ensure that the water and sewer enterprise funds are self-sufficient. Long-term goal is to be and to remain self-sufficient. That's a key component of having enterprise funds, is their self-sufficiency. The study was broken into three phases. with Phase 1 and 2 being completed currently. That was to define our objectives and then also to assess our operational performance to date. At the council briefing back in January, it was requested that before we go into Phase 3, which is to start to prepare a financial plan and potential look at revenue deficiencies and start to assess, is there a need for a rate increase? We were asked to come back and present our findings as far as Phase 1 and 2, and that's what we're doing here tonight. When we kicked off the cost of service study, the goals and objectives were fairly clear. We need to determine what our true cost of service is. We felt that that was important, and the only way to really look at what your revenues are is to really define and hone in on your exact expenses as it relates to providing water and sewer service to our service territory. We wanted to develop a unit cost for each source of supply and in our water reclamation facilities so that we can get a handle on what does it cost us. We can use that information to project future expenditures. If plants are proposed or water sources are made available, we can forecast what those will cost the city and compare how they fit into our rate base. So it'll be a good tool not only to determine where we are today, but to help us forecast as we continue to grow. We need to look at our internal and interdepartmental costs, our direct and indirect overheads, make sure that we're assessing proper expenditures for labor, increases in power, increases in chemical, our indirects that the general fund provides us, HR services, finance, legal. We need to look at all of those costs and make sure that the water and sewer enterprise funds are bearing their fair share of that cost. That's when you think the true self-sufficiency, those costs need to be into any calculation. As we grow as a utility, we typically, and we look towards development, growth paying for growth. That's always been our mantra. Once that infrastructure is in place, its replacement, as that infrastructure ages 20, 30, 50 years from now, its replacement needs to be funded through the rate base, needs to be funded through user fees. We can't go back to the development community in 50 years and ask them to build us another wastewater treatment plant. Unless they've built additional homes, it just doesn't work. So we need to start to look for some type of replacement funding, and the sooner we start to save today, the better position will be in financially when that infrastructure in 30 years from now, 50 years from now, needs to be replaced. We need to start to identify appropriate levels of contingency, look at future conservation efforts. We've brought a conservation specialist in the room. I told her I wouldn't point her out, but Sandy Rohde in the red turtleneck, she's our new conservation specialist. She wanted to come to a council presentation tonight to see what not to do, so she's using me as a gauge. And then before we move any further, go back to you as a body and look at, are there revenue increases required, and if so, how are they broken out? And then we wanted to brief you, so that's kind of where we are at this point. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Jackson. He'll get into the assessment and its findings, and then I'll come back and we'll get into some discussion on where we go from here.
Thanks, Sean. Mr. Mayor, members of council, my name is Dennis Jackson with Red Oak Consulting, and I was the project manager for this project. I'm a professional engineer and a financial analyst. The overall project objective when we started this was to improve effectiveness and efficiency at all levels and become self-sustaining through rates and charges for the Water Resources Department. That was quite a tall order at the time, and I'm going to try to go into detail on how we have come up with some recommendations and some findings around that. I also wanted to mention we did meet with you, as Sean mentioned, back in January '07, over a year ago now. And if I recall correctly, the council asked us for two important things. One of those was, before we go into the financial plan portion of this project, to come back to council and discuss our findings. So we're here today doing that. And the other one was, at the time there was another study conducted, the Matrix study, and that surveyed across departments, and we were asked to not duplicate that study, to try to go into look in more detail at the department in specific areas and not duplicate any effort. And so we've done that too. We looked at the Matrix study before we launched this effort. So some of our phase one findings were gathered as part of a series of interviews that we did with over 15 city staff and representatives from across departments as well as internal to the department. I think probably a number of those people are here today, 3 or 4 at least. And they each gave us feedback on some of the issues that they thought were important for the Water Resources Department to look at. And quite a number of issues. We asked each one at the end of the interview to identify the one thing that they thought was important. Some of those overlap, but those are listed here. Well, this is too long for us to go into detail on each one. And the department picked up some of these focus areas internally themselves, and they're working on improvement efforts internally. But the 6 things, after several follow-up workshops that we identified, are shown here. Self-sufficiency, uncollected, unbilled revenue, customer service, operating strategies, we'll talk in detail about that, repair and replacement fund, as Sean just mentioned, and water conservation. So these 6 focus areas were the real drivers for our study.
Unbilled revenue versus unbilled water, are you talking unbilled customers versus water lost en route? Sorry, I'm just trying to understand your terminology. Are you talking about water loss when you say unbilled water?
Both.
Okay, both. Sorry.
In order to do this level of a detailed study, and I want to mention that the Water Resources Department staff and Sean, the director, just provided us, and Larry, director of Finance Department, provided us with just a tremendous amount of information. I think they worked overtime to get us more than we really needed, and that was important in the outcome. Normally what we do in a rate study or financial study like this is we start at the top and we go to the right. We basically say what are the revenues, what are the expenses, and then look at what's the outcome. Well, here we were able to really drill down into technical assessments, interviews. We looked at cost by activity, sort of a modified activity-based cost assessment. We included labor, chemicals, electricity, and so on. And we compared those with how they matched up with the budget. So the Water Resources Department is organized by functions, and each of these functions we were able to track expenses by budget and actual. But when asked the question, what is the cost to operate a certain unit of production or a certain piece of the distribution or of wastewater treatment, there was an unknown cost of service by cost component. So we broke it into further detail. On the water side, there's 10 well sites, and they vary in type and complexity. In truth, you really have a very complex water system with lots of different individual components, each one requiring different levels of treatment and then expense, labor, chemicals, etc. We also looked at Lipsco. Lipsco is a city buys bulk water from Lipsco, then distribution, general, and administration. Once we identified those cost centers, each was further evaluated for what cost component comprised the cost center. So chemicals, electricity, labor, maintenance, and so on was broken out by water production area. The same for water distribution with smaller subset of categories, electricity, labor, and maintenance. On wastewater, the cost centers were by treatment facility. Your 3 treatment facilities, Corrugate, Rainbow, and 157th, and then by collection and general and administration. And then again, further cost categories for each cost component, similar to what's on the water side, chemicals, electricity, and so on. What we found, and I'm going to go over water first, then wastewater. What we found on the water side was what's most interesting. This complex system of water sources of supply also has a wide range of costs associated with it. So your least expensive source of supply is producing water at 82 cents per 1,000 gallons. Your most expensive source of supply is producing water at $5.33 per 1,000 gallons. And the reverse osmosis facilities, which have a waste brine disposal, add a cost to that of about 50 cents per 1,000. And so those are, reverse osmosis are expensive sources of supply. Then we have the cost of distribution and general administration. The bottom system-wide average, and this is a weighted average, it's not exactly the addition of those, is $2.91.
Yeah. You go on the same way.
I don't know.
Sorry.
I wanted to know, do we have any idea what adamant is going to be, where they're going to fit in that equation?
Different questions. Yeah.
That's a great question, Mayor. Given the current water quality data that we have, looks like worst case, Adamant will have arsenic treatment, and it'll be a blend. Right now, the ag wells, the agricultural wells in Adamant have an arsenic level of about 12 to 14. The MCL for potable is 10. So it looks like we'll be able to treat some of the Adamant water and then bypass the rest for a target of about 8 parts per million. So it looks like it'll be in the lines with what would Site 18 cost be, about $1.40 in that range is what we're kind of projecting at this point. So it fits well within our portfolio.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Site 12, what do we, as a percentage of our system, how much of our water is coming from Site 12?
Site 12 produces about 1 million gallons a day in the summertime. That's the only time when we run it. That well is a good indication of what groundwater quality is south of the river. The TDS levels at Site 12 are, Site 12 is in the central planning area.
Yep.
But the water quality is very similar to what we'll see in the southern parts into Estrella, where you'll have TDS up around 1,600, which requires us to essentially treat all of the water. We're able to minimize, and Dennis will get into it, I don't want to steal his thunder, but at the Bullard Water Campus, we're able to blend a lot of our sources of supplies through the RO, so we don't run everything through RO. We just knock down the salts to an acceptable level and then blend around it. Site 12 is basically 100% treatment, so that's an indication that if you continue to develop supplies that are essentially 100% RO, it'll be difficult to maintain rates. That's why we're moving in the direction of Adamant and surface water, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but good question.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, keep in mind, I'm going to show these numbers for water graphically in just a minute. On wastewater, the story is somewhat different, simpler, but each of the reclamation facilities was identified as a cost center, and the numbers we're seeing for wastewater treatment are in line with what would be expected, with the exception you can see there of Rainbow Valley. Rainbow Valley's treatment per 1,000 gallons is high because of a low flow, and currently this is not underutilized. So it's running at approximately 130,000 gallons per day, and I think its design is around 500,000. So it's at about a quarter, or 750, excuse me, less than a quarter, sixth of capacity. So those costs would be expected to come down in the future as the capacity is utilized. This is a graphical presentation of the water supply side costs that I mentioned just a moment ago. This is important, we felt was really where the focus of this study needed to go. The vertical bars represent the capacity of the system. So you can see total capacity up to the top of the slide there. The blue line that's kind of curving up and down represents the seasonal demand, or the water system demand. We put an overlay on this information to show you how water supplies are used and how that's driving costs. So as you move towards the top of this graphic, water gets more expensive. And what we see is that in the summer, peak demands are driving costs higher. As water demands increase, you have to bring on those additional water supplies, and they're very expensive, particularly the RO systems that Sean mentioned. So one of the findings and recommendations in our study was to cycle off RO in the winter. That does add some costs for essentially mobilization, demobilization, but the overall net savings is one that's worthwhile. So over the last 2 years, there's been savings by the department in terms of budget reductions last year of approximately $1 million. That was a change in the way maintenance was done on the RO facilities. In our study, we've identified an additional $200,000 for changing the way the RO systems are operated. And that's an annual savings that should be achieved year after year. There's also a recommendation in our Phase 2 report on how to recover costs for utility damage to utilities that would result in some additional revenue, approximately $60,000. So the picture looks like this. Operating revenues run around $16 million, $16.6 million. Impact fee revenues, and then you have general fund money coming into the water resource enterprise. Right now, revenue requirements balance those revenues as follows: $13 million, roughly, 0.44 O&M, debt service on existing bonds of around $7.7 million, and then we have these other issues that Sean we'll talk about more here in just a moment, but indirect expenses and other costs. So the current enterprise fund is balanced, and Sean again will go over some of the other issues for discussion.
What's the general fund transfer?
That's something we've been trying to get rid of for
I thought
a while.
we did.
I did too.
I thought we got rid of that.
There's currently a transfer from the general fund to the enterprise fund.
I see
and
that.
Sean will.
I mean, that's been an issue since I've been on council, and I thought we eliminated that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you want to go? I think Sean's going to address that in his portion of this.
Okay.
So, as part of our study, we've included $260,000 in annual cost savings. Those were identified in our Phase 2. We've also shown, looking forward, that annual rate increases will be required to recover, at a minimum, cost inflation. If you look at that previous slide, those revenue and revenue requirements are roughly balanced, with the exception Sean will talk about. There is some existing debt service currently covered through the general fund. So there are adjustments needed to truly become self-sufficient. And Sean will go over some of those for you. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you today.
Was turning off the RO in the winter your idea?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, to be honest, whenever we do these studies, the best ideas come from staff. And sometimes it just takes workshops, research, and reporting to really flush out those ideas that are worthwhile in pursuing in cost terms. So I think staff gets the credit for identifying the opportunity, and then we researched it, ran the numbers, and helped decide whether or not that would be a cost-effective thing to do.
And just to follow up on that, Mayor, the issue with reverse osmosis is a very complicated system to get started, and it's a very complicated system to stop. You've got membranes, and you have to pickle them and do all sorts of things to keep the membranes basically wet. And you have to kind of work with staff and talk them off the cliff a bit that it's okay to shut these things down. We have to do some proper steps as far as maintenance, and then that we can turn them back on when need to. So we like to, in the past, historically, they like to have kept the reverse osmosis kind of in a ready state in the event that there was a problem, a large main break or a large fire or a big demand. But when you look back at the historical records, we can take a lot of our skids completely offline, and then we just, what we say is we bump the skids that remain kind of in a steady state where we run them for an hour or two once a week just to keep them wet, keep them moist, so that if we do have to turn them on, it's a little easier. So we're working through that. Just as a follow-up, Vice Mayor, you had mentioned, I thought you said volume at Site 12. That's about 8% of our water supply.
That's what I was
So,
getting at.
so I apologize, I misunderstood the question. So,
I saw that, and your graphic was great in representing that.
on to the more policy-related issues as it relates to our finances. Obviously, an enterprise fund should include future debt service coverage requirements. If you fund debt service through the enterprise funds, there's a debt service requirement, and Larry could explain a little bit more what that is, but it's just the financial health of the enterprise fund. You need to keep that at a certain level in order to be able to support debt service. You have to obviously maintain operating reserves. The indirect costs, we've got customer service and billing that's handled through finance. And then again, what I mentioned earlier, all of those indirect costs, and we're still working on those to determine a good hard number on all the indirects. Funded capital replacement reserves, we would recommend 2%, which would essentially represent a 50-year life cycle. So save 2% a year for 50 years would be its replacement, and work towards that over time, build that up over time. Not necessarily an adjustment immediately of a 2% reserve, but you could build that up over time. One of the questions that came up was the existing debt service and how it's still flowing through the enterprise fund. The city in the past had either funded utility infrastructure through the collection of impact fees, and as the impact fees came in, you move forward on projects, or you put out debt service. If it was a front-loaded project like a wastewater treatment capacity, it may require $40 or $50 or $60 million to fund a large expansion of a piece of facility. We collect those impact fees over time. In order to fund those, the city had moved forward in the past using GO bonds. Its debt then becomes a function of the general fund, and if impact fees or revenues at the utility side are insufficient to cover that, then there needs to be a general fund transfer. So we obviously want to move away from that as quickly as possible, and that's what we're going to start to talk about, and some of the options that you as a city council can provide as policy directives to help us get there. The big thing that we need to start to have a discussion on tonight and follow it up at the council advances with the shortfall of impact fee revenues. They've impacted our capital budget. Larry's mentioned in the past few weeks that we had a CIP of around $300 million, fully funded based off of revenue projections, assessed valuations, those things. And now the new projections are about $100 million. Well, what that means from a utility standpoint is the projected impact fees that we're going to be seeing coming into us are just enough to cover our contractual obligations. Our replenishment obligation for CAGRD, which is essentially every time you pull a gallon of groundwater out, you have to replace it with a gallon of groundwater, and that's why it's important that we bring on surface water supplies. We've talked about that in the past. And then the other issue is the CAP charges. We've initiated a Gila Indian River lease. It's $860,000 a year for 15 years. We've got an additional allocation of CAP in our current allocation of CAP that have charges with it, capital charges, back capital charges, and then ongoing fees. So what that means is with our current projections at the CIP budget, there is no money available for any new capital projects for water or wastewater for the next 5 years. So we have to take a very hard look at supply and demand calculations and projections. And we need to start to make, I think, as a city, some tough decisions, and staff needs to provide you some information. And we can get into it a little bit tonight, but I think it's important that as we start to discuss CIP at the council advance, is give you the kind of the cause and effect. If we fund this project, this is what its impact is, and this is how it's competing for dollars with other projects, non-utility. Things are tight right now. I think we're all obviously aware of that. Economic development opportunities need to be looked at. I think the city historically has wanted to put itself in a position so that if economic development opportunities present themselves, large water users or large wastewater producers come into the city, we want to be able to meet those producers. So we need to take a look at projected demand and how it compares to our current supplies. One solution would be to fund revenue bonds through the water and sewer enterprise funds. We have we can do that. We have the asset base that would allow us to float revenue bonds. The debt service associated with those revenue bonds come from the rate base, come from user fees. So we need to take a look at that, and it's a balance. We firmly believe, and as we get into it here on the next slide, that we not only need to look at what our cost pricing is today, but look at potentially seasonal pricing. If you look at that chart, on the left-hand column is our base fee, what our base meter charge fee is, and then you look at water usage in gallons. It's an inclining block rate, which means the more water you use, the more expensive the rate becomes. If you compare that to what our cost of supplies are, you can see that there's a disproportionality there. Our high water users are not fully being charged their true costs. As Dennis showed that slide a few slides back, the more water demand that we see, the higher our demand gets. In our current state, we have to put on very expensive supplies to meet those demands. And we feel that we should look at our rate structure and look at not only how we compare to other valleys, cities, but then look also internally on how we distribute those expenses. We don't feel that if there is a revenue requirement needed today, that we do a unilateral rate increase across the board of X percent. We look at the structure, redistribute those costs, and then look at a potential revenue increase. So it's kind of a two-phase approach.
Are you saying that we're going to have to go out and get another rate survey?
No, I think what we need to do is and I'll get into this in a minute, Councilmember Sousa, is we're recommending that we bring in a citizens committee, a committee of, we look to the council to participate on this, business leaders in the community, and look at our current structure and how we charge water and sewer. Make some recommendations that we adjust that, and then from council policy decisions that will come out, hopefully will come out of the council advance, if there's any infrastructure to be funded through the user rates, how will those affect the water and sewer bills for our citizens? And then at a later work session, present the findings of that committee and their recommendations for potential rate increases. I think it's premature at this point to talk about what percentages we'll see if we were to do nothing but cover existing debt service, which is that general fund transfer, and put in some inflationary numbers. We'd be looking at a rate increase of a few percentage points above inflation per year for 3, 4, 5 years. We're still kind of running the numbers, but I don't want to stand up here today and say it's 6% or 12%, but you're looking at rate increases a few points above inflation. If you start to fund capital projects, and some capital projects are front-loaded, if you want to finish the 157th, for example, that's a big number. That's going to be, 25, 26, $27 million. That's going to have an impact on water and sewer rates. So we're going to present to you those numbers in greater detail at the council advance and essentially give you a matrix that shows if we just cover debt service, this is what we'd be looking at. If we cover debt service and capital and different levels of capital, this is what it'll look like. And then I think it's important before we just unilaterally say we'll spread that burden across the rate base, that we convene some type of citizens committee and we look at the rate structure first and how do we evenly distribute that burden, and then look at the increases. So I think they're tied together, but it's essentially two-pronged because the charts are showing us that there's some disproportionality, that the high water users under any scenario are not paying their true costs.
They're paying what everyone else is paying.
They're actually getting subsidized from the low water users.
That doesn't
Their
sound
costs,
good.
no, it's not. And I mean, this is the reality that we're looking at. So we need to.
And there were years that we didn't have any water increases at all.
And let me. I don't want to get too far ahead. I'm talking a little too much and not showing you enough slides. What we did do is we did look at our current monthly billing. We compared ourselves to our sister cities, Lipscomb. We've kind of tried to take a sampling of the valley. If you look at an average customer, and that's 10,000 gallons a month, the city currently, in its current rate structure, is in the upper tiers. We're right there below Buckeye. So we don't have a lot of room to move if we just make unilateral rate increases. It's going to start to push us to the upper ends within the valley as it relates to water and sewer fees. So that's why I think it's important that we look at the rate structure. If you look at a small water user, 5,000 gallons a month, we fall back a bit, but we're still, in cost we fall back, but again, as a valley, we're still on the upper ends. So there's cause and effect in everything we do here moving forward, and that's why it's important that we look at all options. The high water users, again, obviously the bills are going to increase with the water that they increase. Buckeye starts to pull away a bit from us. They're really looking to place the burden on the high water users with high water bills. And you can see that here, that there's a bit of a pull ahead here. They're ahead of us. But again, I think that's where we need to head towards, is looking at true cost allocation, and people pay their fair share.
A lot of the cities you're comparing us to have surface water. There's a large portion of their.
And I mentioned that in a later slide. If you look at
difference.
If you look at, and an interesting thing, if you look at our current commercial rates, we're not bolded in there, but Goodyear's about middle way down, $116. You can see as we compare to our neighbors to the east and west, we're almost 50% less than what they charge our commercial customers. So that's another reason why we need to look at how do we best distribute that burden. It may not necessarily all fall on the commercial property, but it doesn't necessarily need to all fall on our residents as well. So it's a balance. If you compare our water and sewer rate increases to other utilities, and what I mean by that is gas, cable, electricity, you can see that while our increases over the past few years have come up, as an industry, as a utility provider, you can see that gas increases have far outstripped us. Cable increases have gone way up. We're trending right now with where power is, but it's important to note on that screen is moving forward, I think it's in the city's best interest to take an approach that the cable utility did. And you can see that the cable utility in purple had a very small incline over time, which means that they do annual increases of small amounts every year. What we've done in the past, and you can see our light blue line, in the late 90s, we had a large increase. And then, again, just a few years ago, we just concluded another set of large increases. I think it's in everyone's best interest, and I think it affects the citizenry. It helps minimize any effect is to do annual increases and do them as small increments every year. I think that helps. It helps obviously cover the cost of inflation, but it also helps with rate shock. It's not a nice word to say it like that, but that's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Contextually, we talked about this, and I thought we did a 20% jump, and then help me out here, and then like 10%, and then we were going to go fixed on a cost of living, kind of a COLA type deal. Help me understand where you're at, different than what we talked about when you were new on the job here.
When I came on board, we were moving forward on a rate increase from a report from another consultant that was your standard just rate increase, looked at what our revenue projections were going to be versus what our projected expenses were going to be, and we made, we used that information and moved forward on it. When we started to dig into that report a little bit on the back end, and when I started to kind of debrief and get my feet, I looked at the report, and they never really went into the true cost of what it provides things, and that's why when I presented about a year and a half ago now, January of 2007, it was important that we look at what our true costs are to determine what those costs are. Define either general fund transfers, if so, what those are, why are they happening. What we need to, I think, break out of a habit where in the past we've just kind of funded things and we've moved in a certain direction. We need to step back and start to run this like a utility, like a true business. That's what an enterprise fund is it's a standalone entity that needs to stand on its own 2 feet. And there needs to be conscious decisions from the policymakers that if we want to move in a direction contrary to that, that everybody understands what the cause and effect of that is. If there's a desire from council to do a general fund transfer, we need to know what that is and why it is, so that you as a body of elected officials are comfortable with the decisions that are being made. And I felt at the time that study didn't touch upon a lot of those things. It just looked at revenues and expenses. It didn't really dig into the true costs, and that's what we attempted to do here.
Somehow I left that exercise with the frame of mind that you're saying we need to have, that we were moving towards that.
And I think we have
I
moved.
appreciate your candor.
Well, we have moved towards it. I think if we hadn't done anything,
we'd be
it would
up the creek.
Absolutely. So I think we've moved in that direction, but I think it's time that we clearly define the last step we have to take, or steps we have to take, and as elected officials, as the policymakers for the city, we can provide recommendations, and then you provide direction as far as what your expectations are, and then we need to go in that direction.
So how are you going to get away from a rate survey? If you convene this group, I'm stuck on this, so help me out here. If you convene this group, aren't statutorily, aren't we required to have a
Yes,
survey?
what we need to, what our desire would be is to continue the rate study phase. We have phase 3 of our contract with Red Oak Consulting will allow us to go in and to start to look at scenarios and simulations on if we fund capital, if we don't fund capital, if we cover debt service, if we don't cover debt service, and then what those impacts are on rates. So we have the mechanism internally to get that accomplished. What we need to do, though, is we need to procedurally, and the city attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have to do a public notice. We have to go through public hearings. You have to do that. What our goal is, and it will be an ongoing goal, is to provide, conduct a rate study, if the determination is made that we need to increase rates, do it over a 4-year plan at a minimum, so that we know where we need to go, the citizenry know where we need to go, and the council and policymakers can look at this and put us in a direction once every 4 years, once every 5 years. I don't think it's appropriate to go in every year. We can watch the numbers and we can watch projections and come back mid-cycle with discussion points. But I think we need to start to look proactively at this thing and go in every 4 years and look at it. And if a rate increase is required, make a recommendation.
But Sean, that doesn't fit in with your gradual climb that you were talking about, because in 3 or 4 years, it could require a large jump depending on how much water's costing then.
Yes. I mean, I think the goal is to do it as gradually as possible, and over 4 years is better than one larger increase one time.
I definitely agree.
And it's about projecting, and it's about the city being comfortable with supply and demand projections, and that we all have acknowledged that, we're going to base our decisions on X amount of growth. And if growth happens faster or slower, we may need to readjust where we are with infrastructure. I think it's the desire of everyone, and I certainly wouldn't want to speak for council, but we've worked very hard to get ahead of growth as it relates to water and wastewater supplies and capacities. And I think we need to continue to stay out in front of it, but how far out in front carries with it a cost. And that's where we need, I think, input from the city council on how far do you want us. We can make those recommendations. But what we'd like to do, and back to your original question, Vice Mayor, is to come back with you with a citizens committee. We work with community services, look to business leaders, offer the city council members a seat on this committee, and look at what are our costs currently, what are our revenues currently. There is a deficiency. How do we best allocate that deficiency? How do we adjust our rate structure? And then have the committee come back with a recommendation for the city council to consider. I think one thing we need to look at is funding capital infrastructure through the rate base, through revenue bonds. But I think that's a larger decision that we need to talk about at the council advance, where we can provide you with, this project means this in a rate increase, or this in a revenue requirement, so that you can gauge the overall impact, again, cause and effect. We want to look at addressing peak water demand. That's a big thing. As our supplies continue to grow, the peak demand is going to be huge for us. And then back to the Vice Mayor's earlier comment, we believe that Ataman provides us a lower cost supply. Surface water, CAP water, provides us a lower cost supply. And we want to look to fund and balance a CIP budget that'll allow us to bring those supplies on as quickly as possible and start to break our dependence on high-cost groundwater, and then hopefully start to wean us off as best as we can, or supplement our water appetite with surface water supplies. We have 17,000 acre-feet of surface water and a surface water treatment plant that's under construction, and we want to try to be a partner, and we've been working with the Maricopa Water District on partnering through a bulk deal. No capital for the city. We wouldn't fund any of the plant. We would recover through rates. We would essentially build the capital component into rates. What we need to do is fund and work with the development community on funding a water line to bring that surface water into the city. We've already approached the people over on the Westpac group. I've briefed one of the head guy over there, Phil. We've been working with Newland Communities. We've been talking to them about this as well. Newland's making some very tough decisions here shortly on bringing on high-cost RO water. And what we're trying to tell them is, let's partner on a pipeline, put that project in your back pocket, build it in 20 years or 10 years if we need the water, but in the interim, bring surface water in. It's cheaper for everybody. They'll get more water for the dollar that they expend in capital, we'll get a lower cost water to treat on a dollar per gallon
That's
basis.
CAP water.
Yes, sir. So,
I think the important thing, kind of speaking for constituents here, is we don't want any surprises. So, as much, I know we have the public meetings. Sometimes I don't think everybody gets the public meetings. So it seems like we need more than one approach, more than two approaches to try to make sure that people are aware what the true cost is.
and as the Director of Water Resources, I've tried to maintain a very open and honest relationship, and when council asks questions, I'll give you the honest answer, and that extends to the citizens. So as we get into these citizens committees, they need to be made aware of what these, I use the words cause and effect. There is a cause and effect of every decision we do, and if we fund capital, it's going to cost money.
Sure.
And this is what it's going to cost, and do we decide to do it or not? And you, as an elected body, needs to be comfortable with our recommendations, and we'll make those recommendations, and we'll let you know where we think we need to be, but you need to be comfortable with those decisions.
Well, Sean, would it be a good idea to periodically for you to meet with us individually and give us updates on all of this information, on where we're going with this? Would that help to keep us informed?
I have no problem with that. I'll work through city management, and we're all comfortable with that.
If that's possible, because some of these things are, they're not exactly things that I can readily understand without someone sitting there and kind of hammering them through, because water is not my area.
It's a complicated process,
It is.
council member, and we're going to do our best at the council advance to try to, I don't want to say simplify, but bring it down to a non-technical level so that you can see Project
Simplify
A.
is fine. That's good for me.
We can't make it too simple, then our job is too easy. But we need to bring it down so that everyone can understand, and it's important that we're comfortable with the decisions that we make and the assumptions we make those decisions on.
This pipe that's we're trying to bring the water through from Adaman, that's already been budgeted for this year.
Yes. Well,
Okay, so we don't have to, that's not one of our capital improvement projects we have to worry about?
no, that's a great question. We had budgeted about $14 million this year, and we had done a transfer, and we had $6 million coming in next year to make it. Unfortunately, the $6 million is, dried up as with the revenue projections. But we have enough money in the budget to develop the pipeline, and our goal has always been to build 7 miles of a 7-mile pipeline, because you don't really get a benefit if you only build 6. So we're committed to doing that, and I honestly don't mean that as a joke, but we need. Our decision was the core decision is we have to have the backbone infrastructure in, which is 7 miles of pipe. We're working with Adaman on them providing us excess water from their potable wells as an initial phase, which won't require additional capital on the city's behalf. We'll just be buying water off of their wells that they don't fully utilize today. We'll need to replace that in years 2, 3, 4, or 5 with capital with our own well, or partner with them on new wells, but it initially allows us to use existing capacity. We pay for it on a dollar per gallon basis, but it fits well within our matrix. No brine, so there's no disposal cost. There is a replenishment obligation with it, but it's low-cost water.
Good water.
Yes.
It's good water.
High quality, low cost.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Well, I have a couple of questions in what I heard you say earlier about the Lipsco water. That's beyond what's used north of the I-10, right? The Lipsco water, are we buying water from Lipsco to use in our water system, in the city's water system?
We have a bulk water agreement with Lipsco for them to sell us water at $1.34 per thousand when available.
Okay.
There was no water available from Lipsco all through last summer. So the city of Goodyear, with all of its efforts that we've done, we were self-sufficient with capacity to spare last summer. The capacity that we do have is more expensive than Lipsco, so it's in our best interest. If they have water to provide us, we buy it.
Okay, then the other question is, on the Corget wash plant, you say that we're not near capacity on that. This was built this way to take care of
Rainbow Valley.
You have to Rainbow Valley for the King Ranch, right? To take care of the, or is this something else?
Corget facility is serviced is servicing Estrella, and it was planned to service Kings Ranch. That plan is at approximately 500,000 gallons per day, and it's a 800,000 gallon per day plant. The plant that's being underutilized right now is the Rainbow Valley.
Oh, the Rainbow Valley
Reclamation Facility.
That's the new one.
Exactly. That was 750,000 gallons and was built for Estrella's development. All of their projections are to build homes that will flow into that basin in the next few years. So we expect to see that flow continue to increase, but right now it's a costly plant to run.
So the two plants, let's talk about wastewater for a minute. The two plants, the wastewater from those two plants, is that water usable for like golf courses, the lakes? Is it at Class A?
Yeah, the Rainbow Valley facility is producing Class A plus effluent, and that 130,000 gallons a day is being discharged into the ponds at the golf course in Estrella.
That's what that is.
The Corgate Wash facility can produce, and typically produces Class A plus effluent. It's not permitted for that. We need to do some modifications, and we have money in this year's CIP that's locked in, and Newland Communities has offered to partner with us on some effluent improvements to stabilize the process and get the facility re-permitted. Right now, we're discharging our effluent into the wash, which recharges into the aquifer, so it's not, we're not just wasting it. But what we want to do is we want to introduce that effluent into the non-potable system, which will ultimately get into the lakes.
Okay. And the golf course?
It would get into the lakes. The golf course is fed off of Rainbow. It wouldn't be fed off of the Corgate facility.
Thank you very much.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, 17,000 acre feet on the surface water. How?
And 17,344.
Not to be specific, but the 17,000 plus acres feet. Give me an idea of how many folks that would serve. I mean, I can't remember on that.
Well, it's about 15 million gallons a day. We currently service 13,500 customers with a 10 MGD supply.
So current capacity.
You'd be able to double the size of the city's. You'd be able to double the size of the city service area, and then some with surface water. And then Adaman is 10 MGD, which is another 14,000 customers. So if we could fully utilize CAP and the Adaman water, you're looking at 25 million gallons a day.
At $1.25, $1.50 per thousand.
Say $1.75. I mean, with inflation, it's still cheaper than RO any way you look at it. And there's no disposal of the brine, so even if you can afford it and build it into your rate base, you're still left with an end product that no one wants.
Right.
So that's why it's imperative, and as we move as quickly, and I mean quickly can be over 5 to 10 years. Quickly doesn't need to be in a week, but we quickly move to bring those sources into the city, and then shut down the more expensive sources. And the hope is, as you need to develop those other sources of supply, technology would have caught up with the cost, and then you can support it. But that 25 million gallons at full build-out represents about 25% of our supplies needed.
So are we asking Montage down south to have the same conversation with the private water companies on the surface treatment?
Montage has brought groundwater rights sufficient to service their development, and their groundwater quality is brine-free at this point. So the initial, we've only drilled 2 wells down there, and they need to drill multiple ones, but right now we're looking at TDS levels of around 700 with no arsenic, no nitrate. So it's a high quality, it's as good as an Adaman water. So again, from a price standpoint, $1.60, $1.65 if you need to have a little bit of treatment. So again, very sustainable in a water rate in Sonoran Valley.
Sounds like if we can, we ought to get off that Site 12 RO. I mean, that really drives a lot of.
We only run it when we have to, and unfortunately in the summer we have to.
Right.
But we don't know what to do with the brine when it comes out of there. We don't have any place to put it.
Well, currently the brine goes into the collection system and goes into the 157th,
Okay.
which has increased the salt levels in our effluent. It's still Class A plus, and we can still use it. And what we've made is a policy level decision at Water Resources. If we can set up an internal policy, is that we look for external water supplies before we bring any additional brine, any additional RO water online. So we want to exhaust all efforts to find other water supplies. We may not be able to, but we want to try to hold that line and keep our TDS. This is as high as it gets, and then as we continue to increase flows, it will dilute out and start to drop, because we want to put that effluent to beneficial use.
Right.
Reading the paper today, the story about the trash was somewhat interesting. I don't know if you saw the story about the trash collectors are trending, picking up less trash because there's a lot of empty houses. Are you trending that way at all?
We've
past several months with houses.
Well, two things. We had a lot of rain,
Yeah.
and we've seen some decreases in accounts. I haven't looked at, is there a percentage drop in the number of active accounts, but for the first 3 months of 2008 versus the first 3 months of 2007, there's a 12% decrease in water demand.
Really?
But summer of '06 versus summer of '07, there was a 12% increase. So even though growth has slowed, we've seen growth shift to retail, commercial, industrial. That still carries with it a water and wastewater demand. So when we get into the advance, we need to look at what are our options and what are our projections, because even though residential's gone down, our flows are still going up.
Yeah, and one last remark, Mayor. I got to tell you, I mean, listening to Sean, you know your stuff inside and out, and I mean, not to promote you here, but if there's a lesson to be learned about presentations, I can follow Sean the entire way through. I don't know if everybody else feels that way, but and no, not dissing on other staff, but this guy needs to give presentation lessons as well. So thank you very much.
Out of my pay grade.
It's out of your pay range. Yes, I know. But you're doing a superb job. You really are.
Sean, how serious is our delinquency rate collection?
I'm not certain. I don't think it's very.
You made an issue of it.
Oh, the unbilled.
The billed versus unbilled.
Our biggest thing that we found with the unbilled and uncollected revenues, and the unbilled was obviously water that was sold and was uncollected. One thing that we found that we weren't doing a very good job on, and we've worked with the finance department, they've been hugely supportive, is when contractors hit our infrastructure. We send a crew out and we stop the sewer line overflow, or we stop the water line break, and even if we're there just assisting, as far as I'm concerned, that the clock is running, and we've done a very good job of starting to bill those contractors.
So you're talking about product loss rather than collection?
It's more product loss than it is collections,
Okay.
with the data that we have.
Okay, last question. When you said that we're going to be out of CIP funding for the next, can't spend CIP dollars for the next 5 years, are we covering the wastewater treatment plant at 4 MGD or 6?
We're covering the wastewater treatment plant to in the middle, and I don't mean to be vague with
That's
the answer,
okay.
but what we've done is in the current CIP that was fully balanced, we had projected additional infrastructure next year and the year after to complete it. We did not issue contracts, and we did not issue task orders, so the city's not exposed to have a contractor under contract or construction underway and have no way of paying them. What we need to essentially finish, to oversimplify it, is the influent that comes in, there's some additional work we need to do there, and the effluent that goes out, there's some additional work we need to do there. The middle, essentially the stomach, the digestive part of the process, is in place and fully funded and will be constructed. So if 6 million in the middle, we need a little bit of work on the head and a little bit of work on the tail.
Great. And do we have funding to do that? That's what I'm asking.
Not with our new revenue projections. We're looking at approximately 25 to 26 million to finish that, perhaps as high as 27.
And that takes us to how many MGD?
6 MGD.
Wow.
It's expensive. The problem that we've encountered is the existing 3 million gallon facility that's there. When we're done at 6 MGD, the only thing that's left is going to be a clarifier and an aeration basin. The facility was built in such a way, not master planned, that there was, as an example, 12-inch pipe can only handle so much flow, and it was at full capacity. So in order to upsize it, you have to essentially replace it or build a parallel line, and that increases operating costs. So there was a lot of infrastructure that was existing that we had to, I don't want to say throw away, but we couldn't utilize because it's not expandable. You couldn't snap in modules like we can now. So in a lot of instances, we had to go from 0 to 6 with a lot of our infrastructure. And in some of it, we went from 3 to 6. So it's a long answer to a short question, and I apologize.
I just had one more little comment. I talked to the city manager last week about including something on our workshop agenda. Mainly it had to do with the article out of the Popular Science magazine that I brought you on our sewer on drugs. Sandy, you'll appreciate this. But just wanted to make sure that you knew that I was requesting it, and there's been, since I saw that article and brought it to you, we've seen other things in the newspaper about what not to do with medications and the whys, and some of the cities, especially the larger cities that can afford the studies, have started working on that. So I just wondered if, in the workshop, if you would just address that.
We will, and we've distributed a yellow paper to mayor and council on
Great.
Friday afternoon, so
Great.
it's in your inboxes if you haven't picked it up yet, and I'll be happy to provide something at the advance.
All right, thanks.
You know, Sean, I forgot one thing. Could you also write a yellow paper, I don't want to take up time now, to summarize the actions this council took a couple years ago or whenever, trying to end or terminate the subsidizing of our funds, our water capabilities south of the I-10 with general fund money. And we made some decisions and policies, and I need to read those, okay?
Not a problem, Mayor. I'm not sure if I can get it completed before the advance. I'll work as hard as I can. I'd have to work with
I
finance.
think it's
legal,
going back to see minutes of a meeting.
Yeah, you might just grab the minutes.
Yeah, no, that's all I want.
Okay, then that's,
No, just, what did we decide?
And I want to dig
thought
into
there
the
was a
report a
plan of
bit, too.
attack that you were going to take us, that general fund was no longer going to be a subsidizer of this. I know it was,
Yeah, that was,
but I don't know
that's
what
what I was
When it
saying.
first
I mean,
came on board.
context here, I was trying to understand it. So.
Right, but I thought maybe it was because we weren't able to get where we needed to be, so we still needed the help, the support to.
Yeah, but it was going to be phased out,
Okay.
yeah. No, we weren't cutting it off, we were phasing it down.
Right, with revenues, and I think that's the big problem.
So, hopefully you know that.
thank you.
Okay, you made something very clear for us, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As always, thank you.
Okay, we now have ballpark. Nathan?
You need 5 minutes?
Yeah. Hey, Jim. We've been drinking a lot of water down here.
Okay.
Can we have just 5 minutes?
Why don't we go till 6:35?
Okay.
Sorry. You aren't Nathan.
No, I'm not Nathan. Thank you for recognizing me.
Well, hey, I'm happy, man. You're a piece of cake to follow. You have more presentations.
No, he's good.
Hey, Brian.
He's very
Go for it.
Okay.
He's very good.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. My name is Brian Barnes. I'm Deputy Director of Public Works for the city. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce to you Nathan Torres. Nathan comes to us with many years of experience while serving in the number 2 position for the Peoria Sports Complex. Nathan was involved in all aspects of the stadium operations, and we are very fortunate and happy that Nathan has joined our team. So Nathan will talk to you this evening about the operations of our spring training facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome aboard, Nathan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It's always tough following a seasoned professional in the last presentation, but I will definitely do my best.
I'm sure he couldn't talk baseball as well as you can.
That's right.
Oh, he thinks he could.
He thinks he could, I'm sure.
I'm here today to present a presentation on our ballpark operations update, as well as an update on our spring training preparation. I'd like to, if we can, quickly take you through what opening day may look like, or if you can imagine what opening day may look like in March of 2009. Perhaps it's people leaving their local hotels or their homes to attend a spring training game. Some are making their way very easily to the ballpark. Some arrive early to perhaps watch the teams in live practice at the developmental complex. Others will make their way to the ticket office to purchase that game day ticket, while others perhaps have already purchased their ticket through another means of the box office, such as online or the telephone or through an outlet sale. Regardless of how they purchase that ticket, their next step is to actually approach the gates. And at the gates of the spring training facility, they're met with a friendly volunteer face that accepts their ticket and directs them to their seat. As they're making their way through the ballpark, they're met with an aroma of concession fare. And perhaps it's the traditional ballpark dog that captures their attention, and a large freshly squeezed lemonade, or perhaps it's one of our signature characteristics, such as a Philly cheesesteak with grilled onions. Whatever their flavor is, there's plenty to enjoy at the new ballpark. They will make their way to their seats, whether it's on the plush green lawn or in some of the comfortable accommodations within the ballpark. Perhaps the children will participate in some of the interactive activities around the ballpark, where they can hone their skills on pitching and throwing and catching and perhaps batting. And definitely everybody participates in the 7th inning stretch and the singing of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." You can almost tell it's well on its way. Regardless of how you picture opening day, there are 3 constants, and those 3 constants are: the fans will have, 1, a safe experience, enjoyable experience, and a memorable experience. So those are the 3 constants for which we base our operational plan on. We're currently in the developing phase for putting together our operational plan, and the operational plan is in line with best practices for similar facilities. We also paid careful attention to look for opportunities to maximize our revenue opportunities, as well as minimize our operating expense. And that's the basis for our operational plan that we're presenting here tonight. Once we move from the developmental phase of this plan, we will move into the execution phase, and that's where we will bring back some of these agreements to council for consummation, as well as consummation of some of the operating policies. By October of 2008, we will move into the coordination phase. And basically at that point, we're assembling the pieces of the puzzle, bringing everything together so that we're set for opening day March 2009. And we are well on our way. There are several key operational areas that are pertinent to any ballpark operation, and we're going to review a few of those now. Can't go to the ballpark without a ticket to the game, a very important component of the operational plan. There are two components that make up ticketing. The first component is your ticketing system. Excuse me. Your ticketing system basically expands the reach of your ticket to your audience. to your ticket purchaser through different channels such as a phone, internet, outlet sales, and it provides you the means to do that. It basically expands the reach of your ticket. We intend to publicly procure an exclusive ticketing provider by means of a request for a proposal. And there are some major players out there you're probably familiar with, to name a couple, possibly Ticketmaster or Tickets.com, or current major players in the industry. But we do intend to procure that ticketing system provider. The other component to ticketing is the actual box office management itself. And we intend to accept the Indians' offer to operate the ballpark, to operate the ticketing operations for the first year. And we feel this is critical to our operation for a couple of reasons. One, the Indians have the current resources in place, and we feel that with those resources in place, that this will make the transition seamless from Winter Haven to Goodyear. And so we think that's a good move as we move forward in the first year. And the second reason why we embrace this concept is it actually reduces our operating and maintenance costs. So the Indians will actually carry these expenses for us, and we feel it's a good partnership for the first year. Yes, sir.
Do you anticipate that that the Indians box house will train our staff?
That is the direction for absolutely. That is the direction for the future. We felt that this first year it was important for a seamless transition for the fans, and as well for the Indians to feel comfortable with their clientele.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. On deck in this area, a little baseball terminology. We are currently establishing our pricing structure. We're surveying other Cactus League and Grapefruit League prices, and we're make sure that we're definitely in line and comparable with similar facilities, as well as we're working on establishing the premium and ticket surcharges. So that's what's on deck, and you will be seeing more of that to come. The next critical piece of any operation is the advertising and sponsorship. And this is important because it actually is a means to drive revenue opportunities for the ballpark itself. And this basically consists of any of your outfield billboard signage. It could be an exclusive naming rights sponsor. It could be various program ads, inning announcements. But we intend to manage this in-house, and primarily for two reasons. One, we feel that we would like to capture all the potential that we can for year-round, for all the year-round opportunities available. We don't just want to market and sponsorship of spring training. We want to market and sponsorship for year-round opportunities at the Goodyear Ballpark, and we feel that by doing this in-house, we're able to do that. Thank you. And the second reason why we're conducting this in-house is we feel it's a good step in strengthening the relationship with local businesses and really developing those relationships as we move forward, more of establishing partners. On deck here will be our inventory analysis. This is where we will develop all of our advertising potential, and we'll work closely with the Indians as well in putting this together. We're also looking at different pricing structures at similar facilities to make sure that we're in line.
What do we think the naming rights for the stadium are worth?
It depends who you talk to, and Mr. Mayor, I would not prepared to give you any numbers here. I will say that there has been some success at a couple of spring training facilities, but we feel with our team on board and the help of JMI Sports and, of course, our partners, the Cleveland Indians, we feel that we should be able to generate some worth there.
You know, having two Ohio teams, they might want to come together and pay for naming rights.
Mayor, you're exactly correct, and we will definitely leave no stone unturned. The next area of our operations is event operations, our event preparation. We have created an operational team consisting of all the impacted city departments, PD, fire, traffic engineering, parks, recreation, sanitation. And this team's primary focus will be to ensure that the fans' visit is safe, enjoyable, and memorable. They will develop safety plans. They will develop traffic plans, and this team will also serve as an opportunity to communicate with neighboring cities should they be impacted as well. So we're excited about the team, and we're getting that underway. We're also developing ballpark rules and regulations, and those have been reviewed by our risk management department. They are currently with legal, and we will be bringing those back before you as well. Marketing for the facility itself and event accommodation, something that we've decided to handle in-house. Of course, the vision for this facility is that it be a multi-use facility operating year-round for both professional baseball, but also recreational baseball opportunities and other recreational non-baseball activities for our residents and tourists alike. This will be a balanced use facility. It will accommodate national youth baseball tournaments, adult youth baseball tournaments, civic events, community events, as well as commercial events, concerts, car shows, things like that. But it is our intent to utilize the facility on a year-round basis. And as stated earlier, we do intend to manage and control the event calendar in-house. We feel that by taking ownership of the scheduling calendar that we can balance the use to ensure that our residents are able to use the facility as well as the commercial use. On deck here, we're establishing our rental pricing structure and basically the various agreements and booking methods that we're going to utilize. We're working closely with procurement on establishing a standard form as well as legal, and we hope to have that before you soon as well. Another big area of our operation is our service agreements. We do plan on utilizing a professional parking company for the first year. There are groups out there, and we will actually procure this through the public response for RFP process. There are groups out there that can manage and are set up to manage large event scale events, and we feel this is in our best interest. We'll also execute a cleaning contract, which basically is a specialty cleaning company that will come in and they focus on large scale and event ballpark cleanup. Nonprofit volunteer services. We do plan on utilizing existing nonprofit groups to provide volunteer services in and around the ballpark. There are several different functions that these groups will take. They perhaps will be ticket takers, ushers. They can also be, guest services. Our direction here is to engage the community as much as possible. There are many worthy nonprofit groups, and we would like to extend a hand to them and really engage them in this process. The other thing we think that does for us is it allows us to ensure that the funds generated will actually go back to benefit the local community here.
So if a nonprofit provide ushering service, then what we or the Indians would pay those people who are doing the ushering, and it would go into that nonprofit?
Absolutely correct, sir. Yes, sir. Next major service agreement is our concession deal, our concession service. We are currently reviewing RFPs at this point. We have received responses from 3 of the top industry leaders in the concession business. We're excited about that, and we hope to have a contract before you for consummation within the next 2 months. We've also engaged the Cleveland Indians as part of this process, and we're excited about the proposals that we've received at this point. We also plan and intend to solicit an exclusive soft drink provider. And there's a concept that we're actually seeking policy direction here with regards to one of the signature elements of the stadium, of the ballpark. So if I can have Almo, please. One of the unique signature pieces for the ballpark that we're very excited about is the outfield pavilion. And staff believes that this outfield pavilion area has some programming opportunities that may help us year-round, capture year-round revenue opportunities. We would like your direction on if we'd like to pursue this as a year-round programming opportunity for a sports grill, possibly, that maybe it operates during lunchtime, maybe it's in the evenings, maybe it's on the weekends. We feel that it's very viable, especially with the open concourses and the connectivity between the local businesses and how the concourses will actually serve as a walkway to and from these local businesses. We feel that this is something viable that we at least would like to explore further, but would like your direction on if you believe that that would something you'd like to see, and that would be to operate the outfield pavilion on a year-round basis in some capacity.
Are you maybe looking at this from a standpoint of the Diamondbacks, that area that they have up in, I think it's left field?
Yes, I believe that's called the front row. Absolutely, yes, sir. And again, this may not be something that's immediately viable until the development occurs around the facility, but definitely once those businesses are there, and we feel that it does have some potential there for great programming potential.
Good idea.
Do you want us to answer that now, or you?
Now it's fine, sir.
Sounds good to me.
It sounds good to me, too.
So, again, we'll explore that further with our exclusive concession provider, and of course, we'll bring a fully detailed plan back to you in the future.
Would you still have that available for rental during game days? I mean, because that'd be a big draw during game days.
Absolutely. It will be available during game days. This is non-spring training. Again, we're looking at the ballpark and try to maximize our opportunities. So this would be a non-spring training opportunity for us.
Sounds like a great idea to me. I would, as you're going through this, think about the other events that you're going to be having taking place at the ballpark, and how do you coordinate that with a potential private operation that has the right to operate as a business while maybe a city function is going on in there? And how does that marry up?
That's great. We would actually be the operators of the bar and grill or I shouldn't say bar and grill, of the sports grill through our concession provider. So we would have that control and scheduling capability. For summary, we've identified that we're moving forward utilizing existing nonprofit groups for the ballpark. We will accept the Indians' offer to manage ticket sales for spring training. We will manage in-house the advertising and sponsorship as well as the marketing events for the ballpark. And with that, we received the policy direction from you for the right field pavilion. And with that, we'll answer any questions.
You have a fun job.
Oh, yeah.
Mayor, thank you. My job is my hobby. I feel very fortunate.
You're lucky. Comments, questions?
That was great. That's great.
When you were talking about the ballpark operations, were you also addressing the practice fields?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so when you talk about pricing structures, given our current conversations that are going on at the rec roundtable, are we talking about a differential on those fields because they're a higher end field for things like youth sports and those groups that traditionally don't have the financial mechanism to?
Mayor, Vice Mayor Antoniak, we are currently molding that structure together right now. The initial thought is that we will give some consideration to local community groups, but there has to be a balance with our commercial usage as well. And we think there is room for the various types of groups at this facility, without a doubt.
I think, parking is very imperative We've had a fiasco that occurred here in the air show that we had a couple years ago, and we had to live down some very, very bad PR relative to how that was conducted. And I think it's important that you bring in a private enterprise, as parking is concerned, and to give us some idea of how the traffic flow should be conducted, and then we take lessons from that if we're going to do it on our own. So I think that's a good move.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilmember Sousa. You're right on with that. Of course, you noticed when we imagined opening day, it was the fans conveniently getting to and from the ballpark, and we're really investing time in those efforts through our traffic engineer. They're out surveying other spring training facilities. They're serving as a liaison to construction projects as well as to I-10 projects that may impede our operation during that time, so that everything is minimized, and we want the fans' experience to be as seamless as possible.
As we do. System from the
That's good. How does your job correlate to Regis's? I don't understand.
Regis is the project manager for design and construction. Regis is building it and passes to our department to operate it.
Okay.
And they've done a great job.
Okay, thank you. Any other? Great, thanks a lot. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's Rourke's turn. Ethics policy.
Mayor, members of the council, I didn't provide those. I assume you've read them in the last half hour and digested them and are ready to answer ask me all the questions.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I get the an enviable task of following Sean in his gold standard of council presentations, and Nathan in his day at the ballpark and Philly cheesesteaks, and he probably has a lot more fun on a daily basis at his job than I do. But anyway.
It's not our fault.
But fasten your seatbelts. We're going to talk about ethics.
It's your choice.
Nathan, do you have any openings? But anyway, about a month ago, it may have been a little over a month ago, Councilmember, or Vice Mayor Antoniak put the question to staff and to the council of, is it time to start talking about council adopting a city ethics policy? And as you're probably aware, in your council green book, which regulates the city council rules of procedure, there is a chapter reserved and has been for years. It says for future council ethics policies. So the question we basically have for you this evening is it time to take a look at that policy and to develop that policy, and if so, how do we want to go about doing it? So following the Vice Mayor's question about a month and a half ago, we started some preliminary work on looking at ethics policies and how other cities have adopted policies, and just a little bit about what those policies entail. I'll go at a very high level, kind of go over that this evening. Here's kind of what ethics policies are in other cities in the Valley, and two, is council giving direction that we want to start looking at developing an ethics policy, and if so, here's a couple of ways to do it, and we'll get the ball rolling if that's what the council's desire is. So that's the purpose of tonight's meeting, and by all means, I'm available to ask questions as we move through my presentation. I think ethics, we probably all kind of know or have a feeling about what ethics are and how they guide how we do our jobs and how you do your job as an elected official. But just preparing for tonight's meeting, I did pick up a dictionary just to look up the word ethics, and let's see what the dictionary describes ethics as being. And I'll tell you, the dictionary told me today that the word ethics means a set of principles of right conduct or a theory or a system of moral values. So with that background, we'll move into developing an ethics policy here in the city of Goodyear, or talking about what it is. The goal of an ethics policy is to develop a consistent set of guidelines for council or boards and commissions. A lot of codes of ethics have that envelope. They don't only go to council, they also go to city boards, they go to city commissions. As we get to be a larger and larger city, we're going to have more and more boards, and you may want to develop an ethics policy that's going to apply universally throughout the city. Some ethics policies, City of Phoenix namely, also applies to city employees. So one of the things you're going to need to think about is who are we going to apply this code of ethics to? Is it going to be just limited to council, or are we going to apply it across the board? One of the goals, beyond applying that consistent guideline for all these boards and commissions and the city council to follow, is to develop a mechanism to instill trust into your citizens, that you are doing the right thing and you're following a consistent set of rules in going about conducting the city's business. Another thing you want to avoid is to avoid misconduct issues. A lot of what you'll find in ethics policies out there is just compiling what's already in place in other areas in the law. A lot of it is taking state statutes like conflicts of interest or open meeting law, nepotism policies, and basically just taking all those things that are in different places out there and compiling them into one document for the council or boards, commissions, or city employees to follow. But one thing that ethics policies oftentimes try to do is they want to promote awareness of what the ethics policies are and the different provisions that apply to the city and the employees and council members. And they provide for education. A lot of places, or several, I don't say a lot, but several, require that all the newly elected council members undergo ethics training within 30 days, and all employees undergo ethics training within 120 days of beginning employment with the city. And they also provide that on an annual basis you revisit and have additional ongoing ethics training, just to reinforce those things that are present in the ethics policy on an annual basis. So that's one thing that, as a council, or deciding on how you want to proceed in developing an ethics policy, that's something that they may want to consider in the future. So, just in general, how do you want to move forward in developing an ethics policy? It looks like most cities have started with a citizen committee. They put together a committee of citizens, former council members, business leaders, people with backgrounds in ethics, the clergy, and put together, some places have called it an ethics task force, to start looking at the topic of ethics and what they want their city to adopt as a guideline. Many cities have taken their working document and held a series of public meetings to invite the comment and the feedbacks from the citizens in general in developing an overall ethics policy prior to taking it to the council, who further get to work on the document before adopting a finalized ethics policy. So that's certainly an option. It's the way most places have gone. I don't know what your feelings are, and it's one thing I'd like to talk about tonight, that if we all feel that we want to move forward on an ethics policy, do you want to take the step of developing a citizens committee? And if so, what would you like the makeup of that committee to be? Just in general. I don't need names tonight, but just general background. There's certain advantages of having former council members involved in the process, because they've sat in your seats and they know what issues you encounter on a daily basis. So it's good to have that background. There's the general citizens, college presidents. I think the city of Scottsdale had the president of their local community college, I think, chaired their committee. There's a variety of resources you may want to look at in putting together that committee. And just in general, I'd like to get some feedback, if that's the route you want to take, on what your general makeup is you'd like to see in that committee. And then we'll reach out to those individuals, as well as opening the committee to our citizens as a whole in developing a recommendation list to present to you as a council. Staff involvement. Some cities have had staff as ad hoc members advising, especially if you're going to develop a policy that applies to staff members. Is that something you'd like involved in this committee? Maybe not necessarily sitting on the committee, but as a resource to the committee. And one thing that at least some of the attorneys I've talked to out there is getting an outside consultant as a resource, somebody who's done this before, who knows the pros and cons of various things involved in ethics committees. I talked to one city attorney who said they retained a certain individual that was their consultant for their ethics committee, and they stated that person was worth the weight in gold in guiding that ethics committee to developing what they thought was a very workable and reasonable document that achieved the goals that the citizens sought to achieve in developing an ethics policy. Just in general, I talked a little bit about what an ethics policy is, and earlier I stated it's really what I've seen is it takes different areas of law and different considerations that you want to apply to conducting business as a city official and compiles them into one source document. But just in general, there's general character provisions, and there's even just statements there that you'll put they're just given. So a lot of these things, when I tell you what they are, you're going to say, well, of course, that's just how we go about conducting our business as being a steward of public resources and conducting the city's business. But they've taken all these things and they've kind of put them into one place. And there's like general character provision. It basically says you're going to put the interest of the city and the citizens above your own personal interests. Well, yes, of course. But it's good to have it in one place, and it's good to look at it on an annual basis, and it is certainly a place in an ethics policy for those types of provisions. Conflict of interest. We all know that there's state law that governs conflict of interest. But probably not everyone has a set of Arizona statutes in their home office. I do. But it's good to have a pamphlet, like the City of Phoenix. Every city employee and every city council member gets an ethics handbook, and it's all right there, and you can look at it whenever you have a question. Is this the right thing to do? Well, you can look at your ethical handbook, and it gives examples as well as the law, and gives you some guidance on going about your business as a public official. There's provisions regarding legal compliance. This is an area in which some ethical policies kind of deviate. Some give conflict of interest, for instance. The City of Mesa adopted a policy that gives enforcement authority to the City Council over fellow council members, and they had to do this through a charter amendment. Upon a report of a conflict of interest and a substantiation of the offense, a council, by a supermajority, can take action to letter a reprimand all the way up to forfeiting office in the City of Mesa. So that's an option. Others, just like the City of Scottsdale, has a whole provision involving an independent outside board that investigates conflict of interest complaints, makes findings through this independent board, furthers those findings up to council, who receives and decides what to do with those. But they don't have enforcement authority over other council members, which in our current status in the city charter, we don't. So there's wide variations on legal compliance in these codes of ethics. Topics that they also talk about is political activities. This mainly applies to employees on what role can they take in political activities, either inside the city or in outside city political campaigns. Really probably doesn't focus as much on city council members, although it does give you guidance on what you can and cannot request of city employees in political campaigns. Again, stuff you probably already know, but it's a good resource. The same thing applies to city facilities, resources, and expenses, what is and is not appropriate uses of city facilities and resources. Again, things we probably already know, but is good to centralize. And again, some of them have ongoing training requirements, that you don't just have ethics training at the beginning of a year, at the beginning of your term in office, but it's something that happens on an ongoing basis, not only for elected officials and boards and commission members, but for city employees as well. I think I've kind of already gone over some of this. General character, they want to promote honesty and integrity in office and in city employment. Fairness and respect, they have provisions on how you treat each other, both as a council and as city employees. And effort, it's interesting, some of them have effort provisions. That basically that means that you're going to be at city council meetings. You're a board commission or committee member, you're going to attend those meetings. We have a city charter provision that basically says that if you miss more than X number of meetings, you're subject to being removed from office, but we don't necessarily have that for boards or commissions. So you would establish that this is what your expectation is if you elect to serve on this board or commission, that you are committing that you're going to attend the meetings and fully participate and put forth the effort towards the job. Conflict of interest, again, this more or less what I found mirrors state law, probably for a reason that you don't want to deviate from what the state has established as a baseline, and if you deviate too much, you can run afoul of preemption doctrines in the legal community. But But they take that, and you can expand on it. And some cities have. They put disclosure requirements. They put annual report requirements that you have to fill out a form on an annual basis. Here's what my financial interests are in the city, and you have to put that on record. There's provisions on disclosure policies on acceptance of gifts. What gifts can you accept? What gifts can you not accept? Under state law, there's certain provisions that talk about entertainment for an elected official, that you can't accept entertainment. It basically only applies to lobbyists, but in certain circumstances you can. Some cities have taken a position that you can't accept any tickets or any entertainment or any gifts. Or if you are allowed to take gifts, within 48 hours you have to file a disclosure form with the city clerk saying, on X date, I received 2 tickets to the Diamondbacks from so-and-so, and I accepted it, it's on file, it's public record. So that's one thing that some cities have adopted through their ethics policies, and it's something that an ethics committee may want to think about. Loyalty statements, again, that's kind of a yes, of course, but you are loyal to the city and in your conduct of business. Nepotism policies, we have those in the city employee personnel policies. I think we also have some provisions in the charter about relatives of council members and serving in city employment, but that's something that ethics ethics policies oftentimes addressed.
Did we sign a loyalty oath at the beginning of our term?
You probably did.
First king.
The clerk will probably know more than I do, but I think you do. You're sworn in, you swear.
We swear an oath.
Yeah.
Don't we sign something too?
I think you do.
You signed the loyalty oath, you affirm.
Yeah, it's been so long ago.
And again, it's that sort of thing. It'd probably be very similar to that form, but it'd be something that an ethics policy would probably cover. Another goal of an ethics policy is legal compliance. Again, many ethics policies restate open meeting law and even public records laws. Again, going out to state statutes and incorporating them into a city policy. Attendance, we've already kind of touched on that. We do have attendance requirements for city council members, but we may want to establish that for boards and commissions members and committee members as well, and you can do that in an ethics policy. Disclosure of confidential information provisions. Basically, we talk about something in an executive session, although the state law says you can't go talk about it. This reinforces that. Sometimes we have other city information that is confidential, economic development type projects when we're after a certain project, and we're kind of obligated to keep that confidential. Again, there's reasons sometimes in government to have confidentiality, and even though we do promote openness and transparency, but there are occasions where you do need confidentiality, and it's an ethical issue that you can put into your ethics policy. And again, discrimination and harassment. Ethics policies say you shouldn't do that. Well, of course, that's in the law. But if you had a board or commission member that was harassing a city employee, absent an ethics policy, do you have a recourse? Maybe you don't, to remove them from their board or commission membership. So with an ethics policy, you would have that mechanism in place. I talked a little bit earlier about political activity. Again, it just goes back over a lot of times what's already contained in the law and city policies on what city employees can and can't do as far as political campaigns, but it's good to have it in one central location. Same thing that goes to facilities, resources, and you shouldn't use the city's mail meter to send out campaign materials. I mean, we all know that, but it's probably it's good to have it in an ethics policy. Challenges. Well, challenges just. I guess the first challenge is, okay, is this something we want to do? And if you give direction tonight to get the ball rolling, we'll go out and start. And if the direction is to put together a committee, we'll start putting that committee together, and with the goal of getting the committee back in front of you in, I'd say, 30 to 45 days as far as naming the members of that committee, and then starting the process. I've talked to an attorney who has worked on these committees, and it's not necessarily a quick process. In fact, he says these are inherently controversial when you get these committees together, and there's certainly a lot of spirited discussions, he says, that take place. But I would say we're probably, after you put that committee together, you're probably talking 4 to 5 months before you get a draft proposal of an ethics policy in front of you. So that's kind of the timeline. Probably need 30 to 45 days. And I may be optimistic to put together a committee because you're going to want to put this out to the public and see who's interested. Have the time to interview those individuals, make recommendations to the council, and then name that committee and get the ball rolling. Budget's always an issue, especially in these tough times. If we hire an outside consultant, of course, our budgetary obligations are going to go up, but it's probably worth, as the city attorney in another community told me, it's worth its weight in gold, which with gold prices these days, that's saying a lot. And it's a time commitment, not necessarily for the committee members and the city council as a whole, but obviously for staff as well. But certainly we're prepared to move forward with this if this is the direction that the council gives us. So here we are. I'm ready to answer questions and gather your input and decide on what our next steps should be. And again, I guess the baseline question is this something you want to undertake, and is this the time to do it? Is a committee the way you want to go about it? And if so, who are in broad parameters, what kind of people do you want to see on that committee? And would you like to bring in an outside consultant who's an expert in this type of arena to guide that committee? And with that, I will answer any questions you may have.
Okay. Why don't we start with the Vice Mayor?
Yeah, Rourke, you started it off with your definition, and I wrote down right conduct and moral values out of your definition you took out of the dictionary, and I think I put this idea out there in the sense that, while the dictionary may define ethics as right conduct and, with moral values, I really wanted to hear what Goodyear thought those ought to be for Goodyear. And so I wanted to hear what citizens thought that conduct should be, what they thought was right, what they thought was wrong, what they thought was gray, that needed more clarification. So that's really where the idea came from. Having been on council for, I guess 5 years now, and involved in committees beforehand, there just really was very little guidance outside of state law. Having been a former city staff member of the city of Mesa prior to this manual that was adopted by the voters there, it was addressed with me in the first 2 or 3 hours of my employment there. And so I just felt that we just had a lack. We just are lacking in this area. It's not saying that we're doing anything wrong or right or mischievous, but I think in the spirit of that openness is really where I was coming from with this idea. So with that said, I think I stated early and up front that I thought engaging citizens in this process was a good idea. If that requires outside consulting services, I'd likely support that, once we hear about the costs of that. But I have a feeling a third party is probably a good idea, given the topic, and given the nature of the discussions that will typically, that you've described take place in those citizen committees. You talked about, it's interesting, on the committee type or structure, the task force kind of rang a bell with, what am I trying to say? Sounded good to me, the ethics task force, if you will, versus committee or commission, but maybe ethics commission or committee, the title doesn't really matter to me. But you said clergy and university involvement, and that was an interesting, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a very intriguing thought, and would encourage us to engage. This is an opportunity for us to engage residents and, business-minded folks and otherwise on a broad spectrum. To be involved in the discussion of how we guide those moral values and how we give guidance to that right conduct. So, staff, I think, is a good idea, whether that's ad hoc or a staff member that, is chosen by the staff to sit on there, and be involved in this. For me, sitting here, having been a former city staff member in the East Valley and sitting here at council, what's good for staff is good for me. I don't think that there's really much gray area there. You know, what staff's interaction with a developer ought to be on par with my interaction with the developer. I ought to be held to the same high standard that staff is, and vice versa. So, you know, business folks in the community probably would be good, and residents, and, you know, a whole cadre. We've got 2 universities coming to town. It seems to me we'd be able to tap a resource or two in that arena to be involved. So, I don't know. I'm sure y'all know I'm in support of it. I brought the idea, so I don't have much more to add. I suppose I'll react maybe to some comments. But
Okay, Councilmember Holland?
I thought that was a really good presentation. You were very gentle with us on that. I really like the citizen committee idea, or whatever you want to call it, just because I think they need to be involved in this. We believe in their guidance in this type of matter. I would like to see corporations on that citizen committee, and one of the reasons that I would like that, maybe somebody from Lockheed Martin. A lot of times, my background is large corporations, so a lot of times they deal with this all the time. And when you walk in the door, there's a manual, and they've got one to tell you how you behave. And I don't mean we adopt anything like that, but they've got just about everything covered, and I think they could really help us there. I like the idea of having at least 1, maybe 2 of our staff members go in and out. You know, I don't know if they put in a lot of time and energy during the day, and I don't know how much time they would want to devote to it, but it would be nice if we had their input. They live with it every day. And I would support an outside consultant depending on the cost of the outside consultant and, of course, their experience level as well. So, good. Thank you for taking that ball and running with it.
Councilmember Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would certainly be for a committee that would involve former, as you suggested, former council people, mayors, the like. And certainly I think that if we adopt an ethics policy, that it should be applicable to not only the council, but to staff as well. I think that's pretty universal when ethics policies are adopted in any community that it involves staff and council. Heretofore, this council has been fairly straightforward. We've had our bumps along the way, but I don't think that the 3 or 4 times that we've been involved with concerns about ethics, that has put a bad image on this community, of the individuals that brought the infractions, that these were their personal feelings. I don't think it was a reflection on any individual that sits on the council, but the person himself wanted to get things straight and get it out to the public where it should be. I truthfully feel that the public should be involved on this committee because they're the people that we represent, and they're the people we should be hearing from relative to ethics, because they know best how we should conduct ourselves, not only here but on a daily basis as we go throughout the community in our day-to-day dealing with society as a whole. I think it's a very, very good idea, and I would be for it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Cavalier?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess since I came on the council and for years, and I guess because of the training I went to, but when I first came on the council, we had this hammered into us through the National League of Cities at the first meeting. We have a orientation we go to right after being elected the first time for first-year council members. And then there are these conferences we go to that have ethics courses that I have taken, I guess time and time again. I can tell you about the Sunshine Law in Florida. I can tell you about all the ethics that go on in all the other states, and how that impacts the councils, and what goes on in many of the different communities, and this has been hammered down on me for many, many years. Now, I realize that some of the council, such as Vice Mayor Antoniak, who works full-time, it's difficult for him to get to all that training, and he has missed a lot of this, I know. And because of that, I guess it's, there are people from the council who benefit in that. But I must have about 12 or 14 different books on ethics training, on how you're supposed to act as a council member. And in the state of Florida, for instance, two council members can't be seen together. If just two council members are seen together, you're in violation. So there are some states that the violation of the laws are very, very strict. And then there are other states, and I won't mention in the cities, but where they just do as they want, and they can get together a party. If it's 4 or 5 of them, they really don't. It doesn't matter. But you see every end of it, from one end to the other. And you compare these things, and you see what goes on. And this is fact of the matter is, I was in a training class back when somewhere. It was a National League of Cities conference back east somewhere, and we sat there and we were talking about how you evaluate council members on their job. And I suggested, that maybe the thing of evaluating council members, the fact that the council goes to the polls every 4 years or every 2 years, depending on your state, and that's your evaluation. The community evaluates you, and in Arizona, we're allowed to sit down, and if a couple of us want to get together, if 3 of us want to get together, we can get together and talk things over. We can't talk about how we're going to vote. We can't talk about the topic in that detail, but we can get together. And they were just, oh, what do you mean? This is so you've got every level of this, and I think we have to decide where we stand within all this. I read this or thumb through this City of Phoenix ethics book, and I say, okay, this is good. I think we do all these things, and do we need that pounded into us, or do we need an ethics committee? And is it worth the money to hire a consultant to do all this? But if this is what everyone else wants, that's fine. But I think we know in our hearts what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. Whether we do it or not, that's another thing. So, again, I think we try, and I think any mistakes that have been made on this council or any other council have not been purposely made. And so I guess that's up to the rest of you. I've got a lot of material that I can furnish for you because I've got a lot of material that I've taken away from these training classes.
Mayor, could I respond?
Sure.
Two things that I picked up from the Councilman Cavalier. One being that he may be volunteering. I kind of got that impression with all his experience. That might be something he wants to deal with. The other, we sound real enthusiastic about it. The other thing is, he's talked a lot about the bigger cities and that type of thing, and we're becoming a big city, and so that kind of encourages me to say, yes, I think we need to move forward on this because we're not a small town anymore.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
I have to state, I sat in a training with our mayor within 4 weeks, I think, of being on this council. So just because I'm working doesn't mean I'm not going to
I know,
the
but
same
you don't go
trainings.
to many of the, maybe as many of that that I have gone to.
It doesn't make
I
any
know,
difference.
but I take it.
It's no reflection on anyone.
Well, with all due respect, I take a little exception to your remarks.
No, it's not.
I think this is not a topic that has a lackadaisical approach to it. This is a topic that is serious in nature, that our citizens need to reflect on, and that we as council need to reflect on. And when we walk in here, that there's a book that we can look at. When we want to run for office, there's a book that we can look at. There's something that lives on beyond this council for decades. So that way, future councils, whether working, not working, whether functioning or not functioning, or whether or not they get trained or not, there is some sort of accountability measure, or I'm not talking about measuring our efficacy or efficiency or whether or not we're good council members or bad council members. This is some sort of guidance that walking down the path of being a council member, a vice mayor, or a mayor, and I'm looking ahead and I see a bridge that I'm going to cross, I can open up the ethics manual and I can say, is this a bridge that I want to cross? Is it black and white? Is it gray? Something that maybe has examples in it and that sort of thing. So to me, this is one, I don't think we're pounding it into ourselves by moving forward with such a committee. I think it's very much keeping that dialogue of open government and instilling faith in local elected officials that we're paying attention to these issues and they're front and center for us. Whether, and I'll leave it at that.
And it would be nice if it were in one place. Because it's scattered.
I think I said that it's up to the rest of you how you feel about it, but I can go either way.
Okay. I agree with we need a committee. We need a consultant. I agree with all the recommendations on who could be a member of it. I'd only add, I do think we need strong legal advice in that committee on every time they meet, who understands the Attorney General's perspective on this, or else they're wasting their time, frankly. And then I also, I think since we do have retired military officers, senior military officers in Goodyear, they've been schooled in this since they're second lieutenants. And it wouldn't be bad to have one or two of those. And we do have, right, Gary? Yes, senior guys. Yeah, that's pretty high. So you know, that's a resource with extremely challenging standards, and so let's listen to that. Yes.
One thought, piggybacking on Brenda's, talked about corporations, government contractors. I mean, they cross this bridge day in and day out, those folks that are sitting in front of Cato. And so I think that's maybe where you were leading to.
Absolutely.
But there are folks that are in requests for proposal processes, RFQs, and they don't sometimes understand when and when not to dialogue with council. That's something that I don't even think sometimes we understand here, when to dialogue and when not to dialogue with folks in the middle of the request process.
Okay, you did well.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Sean, competition out here. Okay.
All right.
Any comments from council, from events, city manager?
Mr. Mayor, a couple updates and then some follow-up issues. One is just as a reminder, next Monday, we will have our council meeting in room 117. Work session starts at 5 and then council meeting at 6. We'll be having an opportunity to recognize our high school athletes. So looking forward to that. 2 weeks from today, we will be having the council advance. I think you've all received that agenda, but just as a reminder, that starts at noon on March 31st, and it'll go till 8 in the evening. We have a very busy agenda for you. We'll be having open meeting law training. That will start it off. Budget will be about 3.5 hours, and we have a lot of information we're going to provide. We'll get you something certainly in advance. We will be talking about Office of Mayor and Council structure. It's a commitment of staff to make sure that you have the support that you need, so that'll be talked about. City Center update, we'll be looking for some policy guidance as far as what we're seeing in some of the proposals. We can't go into a lot of detail during this process, but we can bring some things forward to council for discussion. And then lastly, if we have the time and the energy, we'll be talking about environment and sustainability, something that we really want to try and look at, I would say, early in the development of this community. And get it in place now. So looking forward to that. It'll be facilitated by Dick Bowers, former manager for Scottsdale. So again, you will be having a packet in advance of the event. So we'll get that to you probably the few days before the events.
Excuse me, Brian, I thought baseball was on there, the Reds.
The Cincinnati Reds will be bringing a memo of understanding to council for consideration on April the 7th.
I thought, though, that we were going to discuss, by bringing the Reds to town, what were the trade-offs?
I misunderstood your question.
So that on the 7th of April, we have to make a decision.
Correct. What we'll be talking about during that 3.5 hours of budget is going to be very comprehensive, everything from CIP, if you make choices for baseball, What impacts does that have for water, wastewater projects? So that'll be part of the budget discussion. So we will be talking about CIP projects, prioritization. We will be bringing recommendations and then be looking for council input. We'll be talking about the operations budget, the impact of 5% reductions. So all of that will be talked about during that 3.5 hours with the goal of receiving direction on where council would have its priorities.
The council has to feel comfortable after that 31 March meeting.
That's correct.
I mean, there's a time constraint here.
Mr. Mayor, I had a couple of follow-up items, if I may, too, and that is we will be looking at developing some education literature as it relates to our current artwork, and we'll be working with the communications department on that. We will be seeking a meeting with the Arts Commission to give them an update on the Performing Arts Center. Can't go into what's happening during the proposal stage, but certainly give that update to them. And then look for their future input. How can we get them engaged? Water, wastewater cost of service. We'll be providing council a summary of what council's direction was in the past, so we'll get that to you as soon as we can. And looking for really the general fund subsidy, what the input was. I think it was a couple of years ago. If you would like individual meetings on water, wastewater, feel free to call Sean and get those set up if you want more detail on what the presentation was tonight. So, Mr. Mayor and Council, that's all I have.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.